Welcome to episode number 50. This is a World War II story about a fake D-Day that occurred in September 1943 and basically about various efforts to head fake the Nazis before the real Normandy invasion in June of 1944. And the photo in the background is from my recent trip to France, and it actually shows Omaha Beach in Normandy. So, there were various reasons why they chose Normandy for the invasion, but for now we're going to talk about the Pas de Calais. As you can see here in the red circle on the right, it's the shortest crossing. In many ways it was the most logical place to invade. The Germans would get the least warning that you were coming. Of course, it's a shorter crossing, it's easier to resupply, and also, of course, it means the front starts closer to Germany, where you ultimately want to go. Well, if you land in Normandy, you have further to fight before you make it to the German frontier. So it was quite logical that the Germans expected that the most probable place to attack would be in the vicinity of Calais, and would spend a great percentage of their efforts building defences in that area. Now, here is Montgomery, presumably explaining why Normandy and why he chose it. That was from the same trip where I've been to France recently, but we stopped in London on the way back and visited the National Portrait Gallery, and I decided to help Monty point out why Normandy, but not in this episode. Now, since we're talking about head fakes, before we get to Operation Starkey, let's talk about a little thing that is featured in the movie The Longest Day. It's these fake paratroops that they drop down to continue the head fake. So while real paratroopers were being dropped all over Normandy, in the vicinity of Calais, they were dropping these fake paratroops to, sow further seeds of confusion. And here we have another scene from The Longest Day on the German side, where they're looking at one of these fake paratroopers and trying to work out what the heck is going on. Now, for the movie, they made the fake paratroops look terribly realistic, just like miniature real paratroops. But when I visited one of the museums in Normandy, I got a shot of one of the real decoy paratroops. They were called Ruperts, and as you can see, they weren't quite so realistic. I mean, they would certainly do the job when they're coming down at night, and they've got a sort of vaguely humanoid shape to them. But yeah, I guess it wouldn't have looked quite as good in the movie if they'd used one of these sackcloth, vaguely humanoid shapes, I guess. And of course, trying to fake out the enemy with dummy soldiers and dummy tanks is a long-established tradition that's been going for a long time, and in the 21st century it's being used extensively all over in the Ukraine war. That was another way that they were trying to head fake the Germans. They did it in the North African war as well. You make the enemy think you've got tanks you don't have, you make the enemy think you're deployed in places where you're not, all that kind of stuff. And one of the other things that was brought to bear in the D-Day attack was the use of window, more commonly called chaff, but its code name for the RAAF was window. Effectively, you drop these tinfoil strips and they will disrupt the German radar, and this was another way in which they were head faking the Germans, because when you drop these things it looks like there's a whole mass of aircraft, and if nothing else it's just blocking out the view of the German radar so they can't tell where the real bomber squadrons are approaching. Now, if you've watched any of my episodes, you know that it always focuses in one way or another around my family history. Now, I called it Great War Story because I started out with my grandfather, my mother's father, Robert Bruce Fowler, and he was in New Zealand Expeditionary Force from 1914 to 1919. And in due course, he got married in England, in London, on the 1st of January 1919, and returned to New Zealand and raised a family of, ultimately 5. My mother wasn't born in this photo. And the 2 oldest boys were old enough to serve in World War II, and they both went to join initially the RNZEF and then the RAAF in the European theatre. And the boy I've circled here is Alexander John Fowler. And Uncle Alec, as boys do, grew up, and there he is as a soldier, well, a member of the Air Force, going off to war. But sadly, Uncle Alec did not get to come home from the war, and he was killed in February of 1945. And this story is in some way related to him, and this is why I chose to tell this story of Operation Starkey. Now, in researching my various family members, if you've watched any of my other episodes, you'll know that this often leads me into the stories of various other people who were somehow associated with them. Now, in this case, we're turning to Eddy, an Australian pilot. Now, the bomber crews were assigned and stayed together throughout, well, a whole tour of duty. And in this case, Eddy was my uncle's pilot. The photo you see up on the top right is my uncle at the top, and below him is Eddy. It's the only photo I've managed to track down of him. Now, when a crew joined a new squadron, and they were going to be undertaking substantially different kinds of operations, the pilot would often go out on his own with a more experienced crew. The term they used in the RAF was you were going out as second Dickie. These bombers only had one pilot, so you can see from the Squadron operations book that you have Pilot Officer Verrill, and he was the pilot with his regular crew, all those other guys, but in the red circle you can see Flying Officer Eddy. So they'd just arrived at 214 Squadron. They'd done a couple of operations doing gardening, which are like dropping mines in the water off the Frisian coast, but that wasn't really the same. So they had never been out on a mainline bombing operation. So before my uncle would go out, his pilot went out, well, separate from the rest of the crew, and here it is. This is on July the 27th, through to the morning of July 28th, and it was the beginning of Operation Gomorrah against Hamburg, and here's what the account writes. This aircraft attacked Hamburg at 0113 hours from 14,000 feet with 672 4-pound bombs, 48 4-pound X-bombs, these are incendiaries, and 64 30-pound incendiaries on a heading of 240 degrees M. There were small amounts of cloud at 10,000 feet and moderate visibility. The target was identified by green and yellow markers and built-up area seen in the light of flares. Now, in order to try to improve the accuracy of nighttime bombing, they had the Pathfinder force go in first, sometimes a regular 4-engine bomber, sometimes a Mosquito, and they would drop coloured flares, and the follow-up waves of bombers would know that you are to drop your bombs on certain designated colours, and this was, an attempt to improve the accuracy, which had proved to be, let's just put it mildly, wildly inaccurate, and, it improved it a bit at least. The target was identified by green and yellow markers and built-up area seen in the light of flares. Bombs were aimed at green and yellow TIs. Now, a TI is a target indicator, what I was just talking about. Fires were well concentrated around target indicators and smoke up to 20,000 feet. 84 bundles of windows dropped between 0026 and 0157 hours from 13,000 feet. One photo attempted route as ordered. Now, the reason why this is particularly significant, this is the first deployment by the RAF of window, and it was devastatingly effective. The German radar operators had no idea. As far as they could tell, there were tens of thousands of bombers attacking Germany all over the place. They had no way to direct the night fighters to the proper targets, and also they had radar that was, basically remarkably modern sounding, like predictive and, on the course of the bomber up in the sky and trying to target their flak guns more accurately and so on, and most of these defences failed. Now, of course, as it always happens in war, each side adapts to the new tactics introduced by the other, and eventually they come up with countermeasures, etc., etc. But the first time a new innovation is deployed, it is generally devastating because the enemy doesn't even know what it is. Now, in this case, in the Squadron documents, they talk about windows, but I guess it's like with any other new thing, they didn't quite know how to refer to it. And every document I've read, it's always referred to in the singular. So we dropped window. They never talk about dropping windows, but I've repeated it exactly the way they used it here. And they say they dropped 84 bundles of windows from 13,000 feet. Now, a bundle in this case was a package of tin foil weighing approximately 1 pound, so that would be a little under half a kilo. And most of the bombers going in on this first day were dropping window. Later waves against Hamburg, I haven't seen as much evidence they were using window, but this was a significant, well, new innovation in the bombing campaign, and it was to be used to great effect on D-Day as well. Significant. And then we have my uncle's logbook, and this is the first time their bomber crew goes out on a mainline bombing operation, and it's during a particular famous, well, I should say infamous event, a week really, in 1943, where they decided to absolutely pulverize the city of Hamburg. I mean, you can tell from the code name if you know your Bible history. Sodom and Gomorrah were the two cities that were obliterated by God in the Old Testament. And so by calling it Operation Gomorrah, they really were not making any secret of their intentions. Now, the first time that Eddy took his crew out, including my uncle as the navigator, was on July the 29th. As you can see there, they went against Hamburg. And the bombers went out repeatedly over the course of that week, and they joined a second bombing operation against Hamburg on August the 2nd once again. And, well, they did serious damage both times. In fact, on August the 2nd, the weather was particularly appalling, and most of the bombers were forced to turn back and never made it to the target. So Eddy and his crew did well, in fact, to even make it. And as I said, it's when people talk about the most infamous bombing operations of World War II, excluding, of course, the nuclear bombing in Japan, they will talk in the European theatre of the firebombing of Dresden, and there are some who say that it was a war crime, etc., etc. I'm not going to get into that. And the second most devastating and, well, controversial if you get into those kind of arguments, was Operation Gomorrah and the destruction of Hamburg. I mean, they absolutely did pulverize it. Estimates of civilian casualties are, I don't know, in the ballpark of 40,000, hundreds of thousands made homeless. But at the same time, Hamburg was a major military industrial centre. It was particularly important in the construction of U-boats, which would then go out by river out and to take part in the Battle of the Atlantic. And if you know anything of World War II history, you'll know the Battle of the Atlantic was absolutely crucial, and it did indeed cripple German U-boat manufacturing, amongst other things. So, you know, there's arguments in both directions. Now we turn to Murray Peden, a Canadian bomber pilot who was in a number of the same squadrons and training bases as my uncle, and quite remarkably at one point actually flew in the same plane with my uncle. And here's what he had to write about the use of window. A package of window simply contained a large number of tinfoil strips cut to a specific length. The length of the strips was directly related to the wavelength of the main German radar detecting apparatus, the giant Würzburg. When a package of window was dropped from an aircraft, it immediately blossomed out, and the dense cluster of tinfoil strips reflected back an echo on the Würzburg, which was virtually impossible to distinguish from the echo returned by a real aircraft. Around the target area, with hundreds of crews dropping bundles of window, the Würzburgs could be flooded with echoes, completely disrupting the predicted flak and searchlight defences. After the great July 1943 raid on Hamburg, when the RAAF used window for the first time, it was employed routinely by main force, and with considerable success. And then, as a little interesting footnote for the history, probably the second place in which window was used was during the attack on Hamburg. There was a brief time where some of the bombers from 214 Squadron were sent elsewhere. I guess keep the Germans hopping and bomb other targets when they think you're 100% focused on one particular city. And this was the attack on the German town of Remscheid. And it was on the evening of July 31st. And 214 Squadron's contribution were 5 sterlings. And I went through and counted it up out of their operations book, and they dropped over 500 bundles of windows. So that's 500 pounds worth of, weight of tinfoil. And I wonder if that was their main contribution. Or, well, they dropped regular bombs as well. And it was a point where they were approaching, many, many hundreds of bombers against each target. So relatively speaking, 273 bombers in total made it an operation on the smaller side. But post-war examination of Remscheid showed that the bombing had been very effective, and well over 80% of the city was destroyed. And this photo comes from the Australian War Memorial Museum, and here's what they had to say about it. Remscheid, south of the Ruhr, with a population of 107,000, is one of Germany's main manufacturing centres of machine and precision tools for which a special type of steel is used. On the night of July 30th, RAAF Bomber Command made a concentrated attack on Remscheid, and reconnaissance shows that considerable damage has been caused to steelworks and factories concerned with the manufacture of these machine tools. The main railway station had also been severely damaged, and there was considerable devastation to surrounding property. Now, Murray Peden, with 214 Squadron, participated in D-Day itself, and window was used to great effect. And here's what he wrote. 5 fortresses of 214 Squadron, well, I should say at this point, they had been using short Sterlings, the British heavy 4-engine bomber, but at the beginning of 1944 they'd actually been re-equipped with American flying fortresses. So, back to his story. 5 fortresses of 214 Squadron, together with a force of about 3 times as many Lancasters, were to establish a strong patrol line some 80 or 90 miles northeast of the beaches, protecting the left flank of the Great Assault from aerial interference. We would be dropping window continuously to maintain the threat of other heavy bomber forces thrusting inland and blanketing with a continuous and impenetrable curtain of jamming every channel of communication used by the German night fighters. We steered for our appointed patrol line, situated just north and east of Dieppe, and began our run inland almost perpendicular to the coastline. We were flying well above the Lancasters at 27,000 feet, and our orders called for us to window and carry the jamming barrier inland some 80 or 90 miles. Our patrol line ran roughly parallel with the line of the Somme, which lay 10 or 15 miles further off to the northeast. So you can see I've put the blue arrow there, roughly speaking, where 214 Squadron was busy laying huge amounts of window. So again, the German operators would see that there was a heck of a lot of bomber activity in that general area, and would have no idea what was going on. Our orders were to patrol our lengthy beat 8 times, counting the inbound and outbound legs separately. So for several hours we plied back and forth in the darkness, windowing and jamming for all we were worth, radio jamming that is. We left the French coast behind, continuing our descent, this is as they're returning home, and headed back towards England. It was not yet daylight, but the darkness had begun to soften. Suddenly we saw a sight that brought a lump into my throat. A tremendous, awesome aerial armada was passing us in extended formation a mile or 2 on our left side. Not bombers, but C-47s, an airborne army. They were going in. We were coming out. For a long minute I watched them sailing silently onward to their date with destiny. I thought of the men squatting nervously inside and felt like a slacker. After 5 or 6 hours in the air, we were on our way home, heading back to a good breakfast and a clean bed. They were only a quarter of an hour from going in by parachute or glider. To face what? We flew in silence for some time. Now the picture I've included with this slide, of course, doesn't show the C-47s, the Dakotas, but I chose it deliberately because, of course, a lot of the troops were going in on gliders, not as paratroops. And one historic note that a lot of people don't realize is those short Sterlings that 214 Squadron had been using earlier had been taken out because of various flaws. They couldn't fly as high, they were suffering heavier casualties than other bombers, and various other reasons. But they were ideally suited to jobs like towing gliders. So if you know Operation Market Garden, or perhaps the movie A Bridge Too Far, and also on D-Day, the short Stirlings were the bombers most commonly used to tow in the gliders. So in addition to the C-47s, there may well have been quite a number of short Stirlings pulling gliders within Murray Peden's view, and he does mention gliders at the end. Now this brings us back full circle to my uncle, because here we have on September the 8th one of his operations, and you don't get an awful lot from the logbook. You have to dig a lot deeper to work out what it really means, but they're going up in a Stirling 3 on September the 8th. Once again, the Australian Sylvester Eddy, Eddy, is the pilot. My uncle's the navigator, and they are bombing Boulogne in France. Operations as ordered. And because it's much closer, the whole operation takes less than 2.5 hours. So what is going on here? Why were they bombing France? Well, it was all about fake D-Day. 9th of September 1943, not 6th of June 1944, 9th of September 1943. And this whole operation was aimed at a particular target on the French coast, a little bit south of Calais, a little bit north of Boulogne, between these two villages of Audressel and Ambletou. I think that's how you pronounce it. And to give full credit, I found this using Google Street View, this image, and this person, Rémi Fonseca, I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, had actually got a drone footage which you could access via Google Street View, and you can see down the bottom left I'm hovering above the sea, and it gives you a wonderful view of where the so-called invasion, the fake invasion, was supposed to be landing. Yes, it was up to that level of detail where they actually had a landing spot plotted out for their, well, what do you call it, head fake invasion. And to give you a sense of where they're going, well, again, it's pretty obvious. Dover to Calais is still the shortest crossing, and that's where most of the ferries go. And you can see just a little bit down the coast where that location placement is. That's where Operation Starkey was, well, supposed to be landing for this, well, 1943 D-Day. Now, how did the operation work out? There had to be signs for the Germans to try to make them think an invasion was coming out. So the original plans were much more ambitious. In fact, they also wondered if the Germans withdrew too many troops from the area, or something about their defences showed some weakness. They had it initially as a contingency plan to make the whole fake D-Day into a real D-Day if the operations actually worked out. Obviously they didn't. And as time went by, different high command questioned it, and gradually the whole plan was watered down. But the primary objective stayed there, and it was, if they thought there was a real invasion coming in, they would send out as many bombers and fighters as they could, and this would be a good trap, well in range of the British Spitfires, etc., and they could seriously reduce the size of the German Air Force. So if nothing else, in addition to sowing the seeds of confusion among the Germans about where a real invasion might be, they might well be able to do serious damage to the German Air Force. Now, as I already mentioned, that the plans got progressively watered down. Now, the Navy was supposed to supply at least a couple of battleships as lures to tempt the German bombers to come out to sea, but the Naval Command was saying, nope, we do not want to expose our battleships well within range of the German Air Force. Nope, we're not going to do that. And eventually ground troop involvement was cancelled altogether. Well, it included sending a bunch of British and Canadian units down to the coast near the ports, but none of them ever got on any boats or anything like that. But the Air Force contribution went on ahead full steam. So what was to happen when it actually was put into place. Now, this photo on the left is actually from Normandy, on my visit to the the German bunkers in Normandy, but just pretend for now that it's part of the German defences near Boulogne. So, mid-August, about 700 American aircraft and about 150 RAF bombers and fighters would attack various targets around Boulogne, all the kind of things you'd do if you're softening up an invasion target. You go against the airfields, the railway junctions, any ammunition depots, all of that kind of thing. And then from August the 25th to September the 8th, you massively expand your bombing campaign. So roughly about 1,750 American planes, 650 RAF planes, to really make the Germans think that you're taking this target seriously. And then September the 8th, well, what are you going to bomb if it's a real invasion? You're going to try to take out the bunkers with these coastal defensive guns. So September the 8th, all of the focus of the air attacks would shift to the gun emplacements in the bunkers. And then I already mentioned that the British and Canadian ground troops would be moved down to the coast as if they were, getting ready to get aboard the boats. And this, perhaps, if there were German spies or people watching, it was hoped, make the Germans think that there really was a real assault coming. And here we have, again, the Squadron Operations book. There's Flying Officer Eddy, and the next name underneath it is my uncle, Alexander John Fowler. This aircraft attack South Munitions Dump, Boulogne, at 22:50 hours from 14,000 feet on a heading of 130 m, with 6 times 1,000 pound bombs and 8 times 500 pound bombs. It was a moonlit night with no cloud but haze over coast. The target was identified by green and red target indicator markers, which were bombed. No large explosions seen. 2 small fires seen beside green target indicator. 1 photo attempted. Route as ordered. Now, you can definitely see they were dropping, well, I guess we call them bunker buster bombs. Compare what they dropped when they went against Hamburg. When they went against Hamburg, it was 765 4-pound bombs, 45 4-pound incendiaries, 64 30-pound bombs. In this case, 6 1,000-pound bombs and 8 500-pound bombs. They were dropping a very, very different load, obviously designed to try to crack concrete and go after heavier targets. In the event, they didn't really do that much damage to the coastal defences, but, well, at least that's what they were trying to do. Now, the final stage, and if you've watched the movie The Longest Day, you will know this scene. They were really trying to make them think an attack was happening. So, they sorted out 355 different ships into the English Channel. Now, these ships, they didn't really have all the preparation they had in June of 1944, but they had barges, they had ferries, they had river barges from the Thames. They had mines, sweepers and destroyers, even if the Navy wouldn't risk their big battleships. So they were really trying to make the Germans think, here comes the invasion, and, then the Luftwaffe will come out and fight them and all the rest. But there were no troops aboard any of these ships, but it looks like an armada is crossing the English Channel, heading towards Boulogne. And this is what they were hoping for, a mass German response. Panic, German ships sortying, Germans panicking, desperately sending tanks to the front and, running around in circles and all of the rest. But no, the Germans barely reacted, if at all. The Germans didn't do anything. The Germans didn't fall for it. And here is how the official history of 214 Squadron described it. The book is called Avenging in the Shadows, which is a translation of their Latin slogan, motto, I should say, Altor in Umbris, Avenging in the Shadows. And here's how that book described Operation Starkey. Operation Starkey to Boulogne on September 8th proved to be a damp squib. The idea was to make a feint invasion in order to bring the Luftwaffe to battle, but the enemy did not put in an appearance. And then at 9 a.m. in the morning, the code word was sent out, Backchat. And Backchat meant turn around and go home. So all those 350 odd ships turned around and headed back. I mean, it must have taken some skill, frankly, to avoid collisions when you got that many ships in close proximity to each other, all trying to do a 180-degree turn. But that was the end of Operation Starkey. Now, Operation Starkey was actually part of a bigger plan to really try to make the Germans think that, well, big things were afoot. And this was called Operation Cockade. So we've described Operation Starkey, the fake British invasion at Boulogne. But there was also Operation Wadham, which was a fake American invasion at Brest. They were trying to make the Germans think there was a bunch of Americans coming directly from America, landing in the far west of France, perhaps taking advantage of a British invasion at Boulogne, so, presenting the Germans with two different fronts in France. And simultaneously, they were also trying to head fake the Germans into thinking they were going into Normandy. And that was called Operation Tyndall. And frankly, the only real effect out of any of these that you could see in it was that the Germans did keep too many troops in Norway, which meant they really weren't available for fighting where they were needed, and they were probably doing that because they were sufficiently convinced of the risk of a British attempt to attack the Nazis in Norway. So that was probably successful, but the Germans were so unimpressed with the threats at this point that they actually withdrew, I believe, as many as 12 divisions from France and sent them to fight elsewhere. So really, I think they didn't. The main principal objective was somewhat of a failure. Now, I have an interesting little footnote to the story. So here we have this picture I've already showed you of Montgomery saying, yes, it's Norway. Now, since we know that, there were other potential places they were trying to make the Germans think they could attack, I can just imagine that Montgomery is explaining his decision to go into Normandy to this young pilot who is featured in this other portrait in the National Portrait Gallery, who's just behind me when I took that photo. And here you can see him. He looks a bit on the sleepy side, and you can tell he's in a World War II pilot's uniform. And what's interesting and curious about the way they've set up these portraits in the National Gallery is, if you remember, that one of the possibilities is they could go after Norway. That was, the head fake Operation Tyndall. And what makes it particularly interesting when Monty is looking at this pilot is that pilot is in fact Roald Dahl, the famous children's author who wrote, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, and so many other wonderful books. And while he might have been born in Wales, he was of Norwegian extraction. His parents were Norwegian. So I've just got this image in my head now of Monty looking at Roald Dahl going, no, sorry, I know you'd like us to liberate Norway, but we're going into Normandy. Operation Tyndall was just a fake. Sorry about that. Now, not surprisingly, when you drop a lot of bombs on a French city, there's going to be casualties. And you can see here that the German coastal fortifications around Boulogne were very close to heavily populated areas, and so not surprisingly there were quite a few civilian casualties. It's estimated that Operation Starkey resulted in as many as 500 French civilians being killed. But of course it did play some role in the success of the real D-Day in June of 1944. And this is a photo I took on Omaha Beach. My back is to the sea, and this is this strange metal monument they've set up on the beach. And behind it is the older stone monument commemorating the attack by the Americans at Omaha Beach. And, well, if you're constantly feinting and pretending, I'm going to punch you in Norway, I'm going to punch you at Brest, I'm going to punch you at Boulogne, and when the real one comes, you're going to hesitate to respond because you're not sure if it really is the real one. So while the lack of any German response could be seen as a failure, at the same time, you could say that it also contributed to some of the slowness of the Germans in their response to the news that the attack was coming in at Normandy. Is this another fake? They've done it before, after all. We need to wait. We need to hesitate. And, other reasons why, they were, you probably know, they were reluctant to wake up Hitler. It took them too long to release the panzers and all of this kind of stuff. Well, perhaps you could say that Operation Starkey contributed to that. Now, as for my uncle, he was then destined to go on to other things. The bombing operation against Boulogne was in fact the last combat operation he undertook with 214 Squadron, and then his bomber, with all of the crew, were sent elsewhere. They were sent to 161 Squadron, which was operating at the ultra-secret airbase at Tempsford, where they were supplying the French resistance, dropping agents in France, all of that kind of thing. And in due course, I will probably make 1 or 2 episodes about my uncle's time with 161 Squadron, but not today. And that is all I have for you for this episode. So I'm going to say good evening to you, and, well, stay tuned for the next one.